Chapter 6 Down the Purest River. Leaning against the railing of the riverboat, Dazai let himself feel the thrill of dangling over the river without the risk of falling in. The murky brown water was anything but picturesque, but the way it swirled as the boat cut through it was mesmerizing. Dazai watched it as it seemed to fold over and over itself, ripples fading but a little movement always remaining until they merged with the river's gentle waves. It was anything but quiet, with the chugging of the boat and the constant chitter of the jungle. The leaves were always rustling, birds always chirping, animals always fighting and playing. It was the sort of constant noise that faded easily into the background, that everyone tuned out and took for granted. But now, Dazai had the chance to just stand back on the deck and listen. He realized just how pretty it sounded. The rainforest created its own music. There was a special place in his heart for the Amazon now, especially as he steamed past the greenery. He was warm and comfortable, and maybe not happy, but at least a little more at peace than he had been. Even here, on one of the riverboats that looked obnoxiously tall, he would be worried about it toppling over, if not for the fact he hoped it would topple over. It would be funny. He was content. There wasn't any particular reason why he and Chuuya had accepted the offer to take them up the river, other than why not. That was the reason for most things these days. Why should we go and try all the food stalls? Why not? Why should we see if we can catch a monkey? Why not? Why should we dress up in feather bows and big hats and join the parade? Why the hell not? Dazai heard Chuuya's familiar footsteps approaching him from behind, then the railing creaking somewhat dangerously as Chuuya settled at his side. Dazai didn't tense up, bother to stop his gazing at the swirling water or divert his thoughts from whatever obscure thing he was thinking. Like Chuuya would be able to reach inside his brain and see everything, just by being near. Dazai didn't need to. Chuuya's presence was comfortable, and for once in his life, Dazai found himself not changing because of the person at his side. There was no forced smile, no forced conversation, no covering up what he had just been doing like it was illegal. Like thinking wasn't allowed. Chuuya leaned on the railing next to him. "Oi, Mackerel," he started. "Why do I have so many of your dirty socks in my bag?" "Well, because I haven't gotten around to cleaning them, of course." "Yeah, no fucking shit, they stink. But why are they in my bag?" Turning to Chuuya, Dazai put on as serious of a face as he could muster. "It's purely logical, of course. If we put all of the dirty laundry in one place, it will make it so much easier to wash when we find somewhere to wash them." Chuuya raised a disbelieving eyebrow. "You are full of shit. Take your dirty socks out of my bag or I'll throw them in the river, bastard." "Did I mention Chuuya is looking especially radiant today?" Dazai said as a last-ditched attempt. "Nope, you can't distract me with that." "And I'm about to go through so much trouble searching through all my socks," he wailed, ignoring Chuuya. "If only I could get a kiss to motivate me." Chuuya smirked. "Be good and I'll think about it." Dazai felt his brain short-circuit. Not once, in his many, many years of flirting, had Chuuya ever responded. He had wanted to make Chuuya blush. He looked cute, but this was an entirely unexpected outcome. He had not planned for this, nor how hot Chuuya was when he was saying it. "Oh my god!" Chuuya interrupted his internal, well, whatever it was, kicking his brain slightly back into gear. "All that flirting, and that made you shut the fuck up at last? I'll have to do that more often. You can deal it, but you can't take it, huh?" Drawing his last remaining brain cells together to be able to form coherent sentences, Dazai wiggled his eyebrows at Chuuya. "I assure you, I can definitely take it." Chuuya paused, then let out the most disappointed sigh Dazai had ever heard. Walking back under the roof of the boat, he flipped Dazai off. "Remember about the socks," he called back, out of sight before Dazai could get another word in. Dazai went back to watching the scenery as it passed, remembering to take his socks out at the last possible minute. As much as he wanted to annoy Chuuya, he also knew that the threat to throw his socks in the river was by no means empty. Dazai may enjoy it, but he was not about to risk his socks. Besides, there were undoubtedly a million other fun, undiscovered ways to annoy Chuuya. A few days into their aimless travel down the river, they were talking to the captain of the boat. He was a tall, slim man with a permanent wide smile and a loud voice. He seemed to have taken a liking to them over the past few days, something about their antics being entertaining. Dazai didn't know. His Portuguese was just as broken as theirs was. He had just moved to Brazil from the Caribbean. However, Portuguese was still their only shared language, so they stumbled through conversations together. He told them that he had a friend who lived in one of the downstream towns, who had a cabin he would be happy to rent to them for a little while, and with nothing better to do, Dazai and Chuuya agreed. They met the friend at the dock. He was a balding man, with an unimpressed stare. He didn't glance twice at Dazai and Chuuya, clearly used to the strange sort of people that ended up staying at his cabin. Even 2 4 and 18-year-olds. With a few short words, he led them through the little town. Dazai marveled at how the people still managed to build towns out so far into the wilderness. The buildings were an earthly color, nicely spaced, and roads paved. Whenever Dazai had imagined living on the Amazon previously, he had thought of tree houses with bridges in between. But, of course, he knew that wasn't realistic. But it sounded cool. So that's what he thought of. Privately, he thought people should build more tree houses with little bridges between. They were led away from the town, until the path they were walking was less of a path and more of a well-used dirt track. It gave the thing an air of mystery, Dazai felt. However, he could see Chuuya eyeing the man with suspicion. He supposed this was a good place to bury bodies without them being discovered. Maybe he should be more worried, but he wasn't particularly. It wouldn't be their bodies getting buried. Despite Chuuya's doubts, the path did lead to a cabin, and a pretty nice one at that. The man led them inside, opening the shutters and revealing that the cabin was right on the river's edge. "It's only a 5-minute walk from the village," the man said. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, kitchen, living room. Dazai nodded sagely. Does it have... He felt a wave of something he couldn't really describe anything other as pain. Not necessarily physical, but something that just started hurting inside his chest, and he just wished it would stop. He knew it would be gone in a few minutes. This happened often, but it didn't make it any less easier. "You all right, lad?" the man asked. And Dazai held up a finger, praying the man wouldn't take it as an insult. He couldn't exactly speak right now. Just give me a minute, he thought, and please, for the love of God, don't question it. Used to this happening, Chuuya quickly picked up Dazai's line of inquiry. Dazai silently thanked Chuuya and waited for the bone-crushing hurt to just fade. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, it ebbed away, leaving Dazai with only residual pain. It was one that lingered in everything he did, so he easily pushed it to the side and rejoined the conversation. "And is there enough gas for the stove?" he asked, his voice as cheery as he could muster while speaking Portuguese. He almost hated how quickly he could bounce back. But it was just one of those things he had become accustomed to. A minute or two, and it was over. At the start of their journey, Dazai had hated himself for having those self-loathing, world-despising moments. But he had quickly accepted that it was just a part of life. Just a part of his life, anyway. As long as the moments around it were okay, they didn't matter. It was only a few moments out of many, after all. The man nodded his head in affirmation. They talked about the necessities a few minutes longer, before the man left. Dazai pretended he hadn't heard the man ask Chuuya, "What was up with your friend?" as he left. He pretended it didn't feel like a burst of dread rushing through him. "I couldn't help it," he wanted to scream. You try talking while suddenly feeling like your existence is pitiful and nothing is ever going to be okay, overwhelms you. At long last, the man left. Chuuya wandered over to Dazai, not even thinking to mention his moment. It happened so much there was no point in talking about it anymore. Dazai felt a strange urge to wrap his arms around Chuuya's waist, hold him close in the middle of the cabin. The birds whistled and the crickets chirped, and the light lit the room up golden. Holding Chuuya close would be the perfect piece. His hair looked so soft and perfect, and was exactly the right height for Dazai to bury his face in. But he didn't. Instead, he breathed in deeply, letting the fresh air being let in through the windows fill his lungs. "Hey, Hat Rack," he asked, breaking the silence. "What's for dinner?" A few hours later, once the sun had set below the trees and dinner had been eaten, Dazai and Chuuya sat out on the cabin's veranda. It was right on the river's edge, and had probably been owned by a previous fisherman. There was a pole for tying a boat and an empty space at the fence to get into it. It was a bit overgrown, leaves hanging over the roofing, and wood weathered and worn. But Dazai liked it. He leaned on the fence, admiring how the jungle around them looked in the dark, lit up only by the lantern hanging on the veranda. It twisted in the trees, into contorting shadows, but rather than being filled with unease, Dazai found it only added to the charm of the entire thing. Chuuya leaned on the fence next to Dazai, the lantern lighting up his face, the slant of his nose, the top of his cheeks. It highlighted everything. It was even reflected in his sparkling eyes. Chuuya talked animatedly, and Dazai listened, letting his voice wash over him like a blanket. It felt like just the two of them existed out here, so cut off from the world, and Dazai didn't particularly need anyone else. Just Chuuya was enough for him. Of course, they would have to re-enter the world eventually, but for now, he could indulge in his fantasy that it was just the two of them. The days in the cabin were idyllic. Each one was spent doing next to nothing, and yet Dazai was hardly bored. Even the lazy days spent lounging around, curled up on a chair or in bed, felt all right. Every day they seemed to be doing something, traipsing through the wilderness, competing to see who could make the best bouquet of flowers, venturing into town to get food. Dazai had tried taming a snake numerous times, but Chuuya had gotten a stick and poked it away from him, saying something about poison, and no, you can't wear it like a fucking feather boa. Personally, Dazai thought he'd look very cool if he had a snake that sat around his shoulders and glared at people for him. But apparently, the snake wants to strangle you, dipshit. No matter what they did during the day, Dazai knew they would always end up in the same place each night, a novelty he hadn't had since he left Yokohama. It was nice to have a place to themselves, even just for a few weeks. The cabin was small, with only one double bed, so Dazai knew no matter what, he would always end up lying in the bed next to Chuuya as the stars twinkled outside the shutters. He would listen to Chuuya's breathing even out as he fell asleep, starfished across the bed. Oftentimes, Dazai would simply lie there, begging for the bliss of sleep to overcome, staring at the ceiling for hours on end. When he started to see faces in the wooden-paneled ceiling, he got up, quietly roaming around the small cabin, kitchen, living room, veranda, check on Chuuya, back to the living room. He would do whatever he felt like, reading, laundry, solitaire with cards he stashed in his bag, whatever he felt like, as long as it wouldn't wake Chuuya. There was an obscure happiness to being able to do whatever he wanted late at night, without being questioned or judged. Dazai reveled in the times where he could just exist, without the pressure of the world around him. However, he welcomed the times where sleep did allow him to fall into its evasive grasp. He hardly seemed to have nightmares in the warm room so far away from Yokohama, and if he woke up with Chuuya's arms around him, his face buried in the crook of Chuuya's neck, well, neither of them would mention it. At the end of one such day, filled with nothing, Dazai lingered on the veranda. It was peaceful, with the river rushing beneath him and the gentle breeze rustling his clothes. He could hear Chuuya drying his hair after his shower, the scent of the flowery soaps filling the cabin. It might just be one of Dazai's favorite smells. On this particular night, the feeling of not quite fitting in, of not quite being human, and that something fundamental in him was missing hit him. A personality, a soul, a heart, he didn't know, but he felt its absence keenly. He tried to force down the feelings, stop them from spilling over, but they just kept nagging at the edge of his mind. He took a deep breath, trying to let the sounds of the Amazon wash over him and sweep it all away. It didn't work. Of course it didn't. He never expected it to. A river could never wash away his sorrows. If only there was such a simple solution to life's uneasiness. Chuuya's footsteps approached from behind Dazai. Before he came to rest on the railing next to Dazai, hair still damp. Despite only being a few centimeters away, it felt like there were worlds separating them. Chuuya was something that Dazai was not, and no closeness could ever compensate for that. They stood in silence, watching the river as it passed. Dazai wanted to say something, anything, just close the gap that was stretching wider and wider between him and Chuuya every moment. There were always words waiting right at the tip of his tongue, but they never made it further than that. What could he say? What would even make a difference? like words could bridge the gap between Dazai and humanity. It was foolish to even think that. "I'm sorry, Chuuya," he thought, hoping irrationally that it would somehow be heard. "I'm sorry that you ended up with someone like me. I'm sorry I could never be human like you." He wondered how much Chuuya would hate him if he could really see how out of place and unnatural Dazai was. There was something inside Dazai that seemed to get pleasure from poking at Dazai's pains, and he had no choice but to endure how it was poking at the empty space inside his chest, making it even more apparent that something was missing. He hated it all. No matter how happy he was, he always ended up chasing the same pain. The pain he so despised, yet seemingly couldn't live without. Why the fuck couldn't he just be happy? In peace? Could it please just stop? He wanted to ask what Chuuya saw in him. Why Chuuya would put up with him for this long. Why Chuuya would ever think of running away from the Mafia with him. He couldn't imagine one good reason. He was barely even a person to give characteristics to. He wanted to ask so badly, but he knew there was no answer that would satisfy him. "Regretting your choice of person to run away with?" Dazai blurted, unable to keep all his questions contained. Chuuya snorted. "Got that right. I used to be around a stinky mackerel every day. Now I'm around a stinky mackerel all day, every day." Dazai forced a smile. On any other day, he wouldn't have let the jab get to him. He would respond with something equally degrading, but today he couldn't quite bring himself to. "What's got you being so self-aware anyway?" Chuuya asks. Dazai shrugs. How could he ever put it into words? "Just feel bad for you, that's all." Chuuya frowned. Dazai knew how he sounded. Chuuya knew a Dazai who was always upbeat, never vulnerable, and certainly never talked about himself like this. He wasn't Chuuya's Dazai, nor was he any other of the Dazais that people knew. His stomach twisted at the thought that Chuuya had seen through the act, despite despising the act. Why couldn't he just have a personality like everyone else? Which Dazai was even the real one? If he had to keep acting like this, it only cemented his belief that there was no real Dazai. There was nothing under the facades. "Okay, what's up?" Dazai's head snapped over to see Chuuya squinting at him, concerned. Dazai waved him off. "Nothing, don't worry." He paused, weighing his next words. "I'm sorry for worrying you," he added hesitantly. He felt Chuuya deserved something for seeing him so out of character, so unlike the Dazai he knew, and an apology was all he could give. The reminder that he wasn't even entirely himself to Chuuya only made his heart sink further. He knew that, he knew it, but it didn't make the reminder hurt any less. "Okay, now I know there's definitely something up," Chuuya said. "The Dazai I know would never apologize." Dazai felt all the pain, guilt, anger at himself rise up in him. "That's the fucking problem, isn't it?" he yelled, his voice echoing through the quiet night. It seemed to spill out of him without his permission. All the things he had built up and built up and built up, and now he couldn't keep them in anymore. "The Dazai you know doesn't exist." Whoa, what do you mean you don't exist?" "I mean, you've been tricked, Chuuya. Tricked into becoming friends with someone who's barely anyone at all. You traveled halfway around the world with me, and you don't even know who I really am." Dazai wanted Chuuya to yell back, to get angry, to leave. That's what he deserved. He had made Chuuya trust him, and yet he wasn't even a person. Chuuya deserved so much more than that. Chuuya deserved someone who wasn't just an empty shell. "Get angry," Dazai thought bitterly at Chuuya. "You're so good at that. Get angry. I deserve it." Instead, Chuuya turned fully to face him. Dazai felt a warm hand rest on his face, cupping his cheek. He didn't know why this was happening. He never should be treated with such tenderness. Chuuya should be looking at him with betrayal, repulsion, not whatever this was. "So tell me," Chuuya said softly. "Tell me who the real Dazai is." "How?" Dazai's voice broke, all the rage seeping out of him, leaving him empty and hurting. "How can I tell you who the real Dazai is when I don't even know?" Chuuya looked at him with no anger, no disgust, no hatred. Dazai felt a sharp pain in his throat. he fought the instinct to turn away from Chuuya, to cover his face as he tried to force the tears down. As much as the softness hurt, like gentle fingers over an open wound, Dazai craved it. He all but melted into the hand that Chuuya placed on his cheek. Dazai desperately tried to force down this stinging in his throat. Chuuya simply watched, patient. Dazai sighed. How was he supposed to put this? It just feels like, I don't know. He didn't know why he was admitting this. There are so many people I pretend to be, but none of them are me. But I don't know even who I am, because if you take away all the facades, there's not really a personality underneath. I'm nothing at all. The tears threatened to spill, and Dazai turned his eyes to the roof in a futile attempt to not let the tears out of his eyes. Chuuya's gentle hand brought Dazai's face back down to face him. Dazai blearily registered Chuuya's eyes still sparkled bright blue in the night, piercing and beautiful. It's all right, Chuuya whispered, running a thumb under Dazai's cheek. You're allowed to cry. At his words, all the barriers Dazai had so carefully crafted seemed to break. Hot, wet tears ran down his cheeks, and he was vaguely aware of being brought into Chuuya's arms. The two of them settled on the floor, Dazai sobbing into the warm cotton of Chuuya's pajamas until he didn't even know what he was crying about anymore. The personality he never had. The guilt of having Chuuya believe in someone who didn't even exist. The emptiness he was carrying everywhere. He didn't know. They just kept spilling and spilling and spilling. He cried for the first time in years in Chuuya's arms. After a while of letting Dazai cry wet spots into his pajamas without complaint, Chuuya spoke up. Before I start, I know I'm not supposed to change your entire worldview with a few words. I'm not fucking delusional. Dazai stilled, bringing his head up off Chuuya's shoulders to listen. The only person who can unfuck you is you, but I'm going to say it anyway, because I can't just not say anything after all that, even if it doesn't help. You have identity problems. At that one sentence, Dazai felt like he had been punched in the gut. He wanted to protest, despite knowing it was true. He hated how Chuuya had so easily seen what he had never thought of, but had always been obvious, now that he thought about it. You don't know who you are, whether it's all a facade. If there's really a you under it all. I'm not going to try to convince you that it's not a facade. I know full well I can't. Your heart tells you a million different fucking things, and I don't understand it, and I never will. But if there's a facade, then something's made a choice to put on the facade, and that's part of your personality. You get me? Dazai frowned. Not really, no, he replied slowly, his voice trembling. Fair enough. Well, a personality is made up of choices you make. It doesn't matter if you agree or not, just hear me out. That means, fuck, let me think of a metaphor. Chuuya paused, staring up into space. Dazai didn't dare interrupt. He had hardly ever seen Chuuya so serious. He wanted to hear every word Chuuya said, because he knew he genuinely meant it. Say there's a lady who owns a bunch of dresses, Chuuya started. Some make her look serious, and some make her look cute. Some make her look hot, but it doesn't matter what they make her look like. She likes all of them. They might make her look different, but she's still the same person wearing the dress. She might look all cute and pretty one day when she's out with her friends, but formal the next day when she's at work. Her dress may have changed, but she's still the same person under it all. Her personality isn't the dress. It's her personality that makes her choose which dress to put on. It's the same with you. The facade you put on to the world isn't your personality by any means. You sure as hell know that. But there is undoubtedly a bit of your personality in the choice to put on the facade. That's how you want the world to see you, so that's how you act. It might be only a little, but there's a Dazai in that. In wanting the world to see you in a certain way, so you pretend. Your personality might hide, but there's a bit of it in every facade, because your personality ain't any of the facades. It's the choice to put the facade on. The facades are a product of your personality. So to have the facades, you've got to have a personality. Maybe it's distorted or hidden, but it's still there. I don't know. I don't pretend to know everything about you, but I do know you better than anyone, so maybe my word is worth something. Maybe you're looking for something more concrete than the facades are a result of your personality, but there you are. That's all I've got. Dazai took a deep breath, letting Chuuya's words register. He didn't entirely know what to think. In so many ways, Chuuya was right. He didn't know, really. He needed time to process it all. Something he didn't recognize swelled in his chest. Chuuya shifted next to him. I'm going to bed now, he said, standing. Join me at some point. Don't just sit out here all night thinking. Dazai nodded, listening to Chuuya retreat inside. Chuuya? He called softly. Chuuya turned around to look at him, still sitting cross-legged on the veranda floor. Thank you. Chuuya smiled. You're less of a monster than you think you are. Dazai felt tears well in his eyes again. He sat out on the veranda for a long time, watching the moon make its journey through the sky as he turned over all of Chuuya's words, everything that had happened that night in his head. And when he finally did go to bed, Chuuya sleepily reached out for him, curling an arm around his waist and pressing his forehead into Dazai's shoulder. As all good things do, their few weeks in the cabin came to an end. Dazai wouldn't miss the cabin, but he felt a strong pang in his chest as they were packing, just as you would feel about anything when you were moving from one place that has been their little corner of paradise for the last few weeks. He would remember it fondly. Perhaps not the bugs that were 3 times larger than any bug in Japan, but certainly the rest of it. Stop being a lazy bastard and come help me pack, Chuuya yelled as Dazai draped himself over the chair in the living room. He had been packing. Most of his clothes were already in the bag, even if they weren't folded. And given that he had left clothes in nearly every corner of the cabin, it had been a lot of effort. We leave tomorrow, for fuck's sake. But Chuuya, Dazai wailed. I've already done so much. No, you haven't. Also, you said you'd get your stuff out of the bathroom, and it's still in there. Dazai sighed, standing up and making his way over to where Chuuya was cleaning out the kitchen cupboards. I'm afraid I simply just can't go on. Why the fuck not? Because I simply can't continue without a kiss from Chuuya to keep me going. Dazai watched Chuuya carefully, waiting to see the exact moment that Chuuya registered his words and blushed a brilliant pink. It never came. Instead, Chuuya whipped around and marched over to Dazai, smirking. Oh yeah? Dazai watched as Chuuya brought his hand up to hold Dazai's collar, before harshly pulling down and crashing Dazai's lips into his own, and holy fuck, his lips were warm and soft, and he was kissing Nakahara Chuuya. Dazai's brain went completely blank, and stayed that way even after Chuuya had pulled away, a satisfied grin on his face. Had that just really happened? Finally? Had he finally kissed Chuuya? He had finally kissed Chuuya. And it was everything he wanted it to be, and more. Holy shit, he said softly, and Chuuya, who was still holding onto his collar, smirked. He looked more attractive than he ever had, which was saying something. Dazai decided that one kiss simply wasn't enough. He brought his head down again, capturing Chuuya's lips for much longer. He allowed himself to be pressed against the kitchen counter, as Chuuya pushed their lips even closer together. Needless to say, not much packing got done that day, but it hardly mattered because all Dazai could think about was Chuuya, and how he would give anything to kiss Chuuya every day of his life if he was allowed. The notes say, they kept trying to kiss before I had it planned in, but here it is finally. Chapter 7, Peru. Not much changed after that day in the cabin. They had always been stuck together. Stolen each other's things, invaded each other's personal space, and now was no different. They still bickered constantly, with Dazai's irritated teasing and Chuuya's irritated shouting. They were still the same Dazai and Chuuya. The only difference was, while they argued, Dazai could take Chuuya's hand in his, savoring the feeling of their hands fitting together like they were supposed to. When Chuuya fell asleep on his shoulder on the bus out of Brazil, Dazai could run his fingers through his hair and feel that it was just as soft as he thought. Whenever he wanted, he could lean down and kiss Chuuya, just as he had dreamt so many times. There was no holding himself back from hugs, kisses, anything. He got to take every little daydream from the past months and make it reality. Other than considering Dazai's clinginess, their way of life didn't change much either. They still wandered from country to country, doing whatever they felt like and seeing what circumstances presented themselves. And when you never really saw any reason to say no to an invitation or offer, there were certainly some interesting circumstances. For example, if you had told Dazai a year ago, or even 6 months ago, that he would spend a week or two helping out on a farm in Peru in exchange for some money and housing, he would have said you had gone insane. Why would he help out on a farm in all places? Why, when he had all his money? Why, when he hated to work and had no need for it? Now it came to it, Dazai didn't mind the work too much. It was starkly different to what he did in the Mafia, but different didn't mean bad. To his surprise, he found he didn't mind working with the alpacas on the hills all day. There was something oddly peaceful about it. He was also pretty sure the alpacas were starting to warm up to him. There had even been one that licked his face the other day. Dazai was charmed. Maybe one would even let him lay across its ridiculously soft wool. Every morning, he and Chuuya were awoken by the sun as it streamed through the window and into their rickety little room. They had been given 2 beds, despite only ever using one. It didn't feel right to sleep with Chuuya across the room when Dazai had spent so many nights curled around him. Even if it was a bit of a squeeze to fit into one bed, they would make it work. This morning, Dazai woke before Chuuya and got to watch as the morning sun illuminated his partner's face, painting it with gold. He smiled softly, something warm crawling into his chest and making its home there. Gently, he wove his hands through Chuuya's hair, something he's never gotten tired of doing, and roused him from his sleep. Slowly, Chuuya woke up, grumbling as he did so. He blinked blearily at Dazai from where he lay on top of Dazai's chest. Dazai smiled. Chuuya looked adorable first thing in the morning, although if he told Chuuya that, he had no doubt he'd get a punch to the face. Despite the changes to their relationship, there were many things that stayed the same. "What are you thinking about? You're staring," Chuuya asked sleepily, lifting his head and staring at Dazai with a softness he would never allow himself if he was fully awake. Dazai stared at Chuuya, his eyes full of genuity and his hair messed up from the hours of using Dazai as a pillow. Every time he saw Chuuya, he wondered how he got more beautiful. "I was thinking, what does it matter if we're human? I think I'm alright with just being us. No matter what, we'll always be each other's, and that counts for something," Dazai replied earnestly. Chuuya hummed, accepting the answer and lying his head back down. A few moments passed in comfortable silence. "I've got my evidence." "What?" Dazai asked, confused. "On the plane. You said you don't get things like love. Well, that sounds an awful lot like love to me." "Oh," Dazai breathed, shocked. That's what it was, wasn't it? This feeling. He loved Chuuya. He loved Chuuya. He would probably freak out about it later, but for now, in the comfortable haziness of the morning, he couldn't bring himself to be anything but grateful that it was Chuuya he had fallen in love with. "I suppose it does, doesn't it?" Chuuya hummed, content. "Yep. And Dazai? I love you too." Anyway, I love this fic. Hey, why can't turtles fly? I just wanted to say your fic is like my one of, if not my favorite Bungo Stray Dogs fanfic. Like, I can't express how much I love this fanfic. It's so cute, and it's got just the right amount of angst and fluff. And the slow burn is slow, but it's not like so slow that it's like painful. So anyway, moral of the story, thank you so much for letting me podfic it. I loved every second of this, and I love your writing. Anyway, thanks. Bye, y'all.